So after looking at lots of different female editors, the ones that really stuck out for me are Margaret Booth and Anne V. Coates. So the reason why I think Margaret Booth will be a good option for an unheard voice is because, firstly, she is the first person, regardless of gender, who was considered a film editor. And the reason for that is because she was working on a production with Irving Thalberg, and at this point she gained quite a bit of recognition. So she started editing in 1915 at the age of 17. And back then the position was called a cutter. And a cutter basically consisted of somebody just literally splicing footage, like 100 feet footage, lots of the stuff, and putting it together the way that the director wanted it. And it was considered a non-creative role. So it was actually compared to sewing because of the intricacy of it. So it was actually taken up by a lot of working class women back then. Anyway, forwarding into a few years later, Margaret Booth was recognised as being a very good cutter, and when she was working on the production with Irving Thalberg, he said that he coined the term film editor for her. So she was actually the first person considered a film editor. Although technically she wasn't the first editor, she was the first person to be labelled an editor. So that's why Margaret Booth is quite a good choice. She also has a really extensive history in editing, and she didn't retire till I think 1982, so she would have been in her late 80s, which is really impressive. She has one of the longest careers in editing. And the second choice is Anne V. Coates. Now, the reason why Anne V. Coates is interesting is because she has a really strange background. She was from a really religious background. Her parents and family were all very religious. She wasn't allowed to go to the cinema when she was younger. And eventually she managed to get a job actually editing church footage. So it was they were called Sunday shorts, and they were little religious films that would be circulated around England to promote Christianity. So she had a job cutting and splicing that footage, and which eventually led her to becoming a fully fledged film editor. She gained recognition on David Lean's Lawrence of Arabia, and she did one of the most famous cuts in history, which was a man holding a match, and it suddenly cut to a sunrise in a desert. And the reason why it was one of the most famous cuts is because continuity editing was a big thing back then, and continuity editing was where you effectively don't notice the cut. So it's like a continuous cut, seamless, and often referred to as the invisible art. But when the French New Wave came, the cuts became more jarring, and it was a very different style of editing back then. And Anne V. Coates was a pioneer of that style. She was very much a revolutionary when it came to editing. So that's why she's quite interesting. The problem is that with Anne V. Coates, she has won an awful lot of Academy Awards and BAFTAs for her work as an editor, so she is actually quite recognised. So it may raise the question whether she qualifies as an unheard voice. Margaret Booth has also won one Oscar, an honorary Oscar, for her years of service, but she is less well known. And I think the reason for this is because, firstly, she started in the silent era, so she was very much a background force, but she still rose to prominence. She was editor-in-chief at MGM. But she wasn't as well recognised as Anne V. Coates, and I think it's because of the era she started out editing. But she was an almighty force in the editing suite. I mean, I've read lots of articles saying that she was the one to be reckoned with. So she seems like the more likely option out of the two.